There we go. That should work. Okay, let's try this again. Be sure everybody knows that, well, it doesn't matter, I'm recording. So anyway. Okay, this was the question I was asking you right here. So which of the following transactions would represent an addition to a nation's current gross domestic product? So which of these would, remember your indicators and yes, so C, the government increases its domestic purchases of food for use by the military. So that would definitely be a contender. And then A and B are wrong because stock isn't factored into GDP. D is corporations sell shoes from last year's inventory. Previous year's purchases and sales and stuff like that don't count towards a GDP for the year. And mother sells her car to her daughter. Used car, used products, used goods are not considered in the GDP. Only final brand new products. So the government increases its domestic purchases of food for use by the military. So yeah, it'd be C, government purchases. Okay. Now we have, which of the following is included in the computation of gross domestic product? Wait, yeah. The additions to business inventories. We'll see about that.
All right, I hope you answered E, addition to business inventories. Again, government transfer payments do not count toward GDP. Used goods do not count toward GDP.
Oh yeah, so the transfer, I knew that. Transfer payments don't count, unemployment benefits don't count, purchase of used goods don't count, child care tasks performed by family members don't count. I was unclear about whether and why it was E though.
Non-market transactions like child care tasks do not count toward GDP. And it's not the value of inventories, it's the changes to business inventories that count toward GDP.
There we go, yeah. So the value, whenever you see value, it disqualifies it. So we're not measuring value, we're measuring expenditures. So you would have eliminated all four of those and it would have left you with E. All right. All right, now we're going to use the expenditure approach to find the GDP for this table right here. So I want you to use the formula that so there's the formula down there, and try to find the total figure in billions of dollars for the GDP. So I'll give you a moment to add those together. There's going to be some subtraction involved. So remember where you're going to subtract. Do keep in mind that you're not adding everything together on that graph, I mean, on that table. You're picking out. So the things you see on here that you've never heard of before are big contenders for things that you're not going to add to the GDP. So yes, you should have gotten 4,500 billion dollars. $4,500 billion is going to be the GDP for this figure we have here. So you should have added 3,000 for consumption, 700 for investment, 1,000 for government purchases, and you would have subtracted 300 by 500, which would have given you negative 200, which you'd have just subtracted, the sum of, this number right here, and it would have given you $4,500 billion. And you just found GDP. And somebody asked what depreciation is. I think what that is the amount of money that has lost value in whatever economy we're looking at. And we're not at that point yet where we're learning about that. But you should have picked out that depreciation is like the odd one out of the bunch. And like indirect business taxes, but it's $0 anyway, so it doesn't really matter. All right, so yeah, you should have, remember you should have subtracted X minus N. Okay, we're gonna move on to look at limitations for GDP. And once we're done looking at that, I'll take any questions, and then I'll let y'all use the rest of the time to make up any work that you have missing. So remember aggregate, what that means. It's the total output or total spending for an entire economy. So it's measure all purchases made across the entire country. And we measure aggregate spending, or it's sometimes called the, like I said, the expenditure approach. I'll spell the whole thing, but expenditure doesn't include sale of used goods or purely financial transactions. All right, so what are the things it can't measure though? So these are the limitations of GDP. GDP does not equal prosperity or higher standards of living. So there are some things that GDP does not reflect. So it measures, the purchases, but it doesn't measure how much is being purchased of like, leisure time, volunteerism and housework and natural beauty. So these are some things that GDP cannot measure. Also, it doesn't, measure how much people spend on, curing diseases or divorce or crime. That is not taken into account in the GDP. So if you purchase, healthcare for a disease, or like you're, hire a lawyer for a divorce, or, pay off fines for a crime or something like that, or this is not measured in the GDP. And these are things that, affect the well-being of people in a country. So if there's a high rate of divorce in a country, but there's a really solid GDP, you could have a really good GDP, but people are not necessarily having a great time. They don't have great well-being. So in this question, what gross domestic product has been criticized as a measure of well-being because it fails to take into account which of the following? What is something that GDP wouldn't necessarily be able to measure? Yeah, that's right. The distribution of income. GDP just measures the total of spending. It doesn't measure, how the income is spent or how it's spread across people in a country. So it's GDP is just not able to measure A. You'd have to have some other kind of system to measure that. And I'm sure that's out of my scope, but I'm sure there is some kind of way, figure or formula that measures the distribution of income in the United States. Oh, I kind of gave that one away. So as a measure of economic welfare, GDP underestimates a country's production of goods and services when there is an increase in what is one of these things that is not measured in the GDP? Yeah, so D, because technically legal services do, I know we said divorce is not measured, but like divorce specifically, I mean, like people can have legal services for all kinds of different things. So divorce is technically measured in the GDP, but like it's just lumped into legal services. But household production is not lumped into, so, like you may have had people in your family make masks for each other, like when COVID started happening. I knew, like, my mom had a friend that like sewed masks for everybody, like, and she took cash for it, and that's not figured into the GDP. So if like there's a big household market in a country and people are purchasing from it, like, you know, a lot of people are just like making stuff from home, like, you know, whatever, like CBD oil or, you know, masks, you know, cookies, you know, whatever kinds of things people want to buy from you know, their neighbors or whatever. This wouldn't be measured in the GDP, and this would underestimate a country's production. So yeah, it would be D. All right, so any questions over you know, the last bit of GDP and like the limitations of GDP? This is one of the easier sections of this course, GDP. But I totally get it if like anybody was had some confusion about anything. But okay, I posted and this thing I posted isn't going to be in the upcoming grades, but I posted a few questions, 6 questions over what we learned today. So you can do this later tonight or tomorrow, but I mean, it's not due for this next grading period. But I'll give you the rest of class time today to finish any and missing work you have turned in. I posted right here the list of things that are going to be on the grade book. I will be taking grades up until noon this Sunday. So that gives you plenty. I need time to put in grades Sunday. So you have until lunchtime on Sunday to turn things in. That's when I'm going to start, like Sunday afternoon or evening is when I'll probably start checking to see that everything's been turned in. But these are the grades. And this is how they show up in Google Classroom too. So, all right. All right. I'm going to go ahead and sign out of this so I can post the recording.